A peaceful November morning settled over Grand Junction, Colorado, as the day began. In Colorado, it was the kind of day when life moved slowly and quietly, until suddenly everything changed. Inside a well-kept two-story home, something unimaginable occurred. A horrifying event had just unfolded, beyond anyone's comprehension. A mother and her child were gone, leaving an eerie emptiness behind. The bed was soaked in blood, a chilling sight of violence. The jewelry box lay open, its contents scattered carelessly. Its contents were strewn across the floor as though in haste. Yet there were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a break-in. No shattered windows, no cries for help, only silence. The silence hung heavy, filled with a sense of dread. At 4:20 p.m., a shaken man called 911, his voice trembling with fear. He said he had just returned from work, only to find his world turned upside down. But what investigators would discover next would shake everything. Over the following months, the investigation would take a dark turn. It would raise a chilling question that no one could ignore. Was the threat ever really outside the house, or was it closer than they thought? In the fall of 2001, the serene streets of Grand Junction were rocked by a disturbing event. Colorado, known for its peaceful atmosphere, was suddenly thrown into chaos. Nestled about 200 miles southwest of Denver, it was a small town that rarely saw drama. But everything changed with one phone call that would ignite terror. That call would set in motion one of the most chilling investigations the town had ever known. It became one of the most harrowing investigations the region had ever witnessed. 38-year-old Michael Blagg, a man with a military past, a Navy veteran who had transitioned into a steady role as a production manager. He had built a life that many would consider perfect until it all fell apart. After serving a decade in the military, he'd now settled into civilian life. He worked as a production manager at Dixon, a well-established industrial firm in the area. He lived in a tidy two-story house with his wife, Jennifer, 34, and their young daughter, Abby, 6 years old. Their bright-eyed 6-year-old daughter, Abby. But everything changed on the afternoon of November 13th. The perfect life they had built came crashing down. At 4:20 p.m., the illusion of their happy life shattered. Michael, in disbelief, dialed 911. He had just come home, and the world he knew was gone. His voice trembled with fear, barely holding steady. He painted a terrifying picture of what he had found. Blood soaked the bed, a clear sign of violence. Items scattered across the floor, and a home that felt hauntingly vacant. His wife and child had disappeared without a trace. Officers stormed the house, weapons drawn, unsure of what awaited them, uncertain if a dangerous intruder was still hiding inside. Room by room, they methodically searched the house, but it was eerily silent, no sign of life. No one was there, yet an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. Something was terribly wrong. In the master bedroom, the horror became clearer. A large pool of blood stained the once pristine sheets. An open jewelry box lay abandoned on the floor. Its contents were scattered across the room, a detail that at first seemed like a burglary gone wrong. But as officers continued their investigation, they couldn't shake the growing sense that something wasn't right, that the evidence wasn't adding up. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. No trace of Jennifer or Abby anywhere. No trace of them inside or outside the house. A full-scale search was immediately launched. Within hours, officers, helicopters, and divers were brought in to assist. Volunteers scoured the surrounding forests. They even used sonar to sweep the Colorado River. Hospitals were contacted, and witnesses were questioned. Yet every lead ended the same way nowhere. Neighbors told detectives that nothing seemed out of place. Nothing unusual had stood out that morning. Everything seemed normal that morning. Michael stated he had left for work just before 6 a.m. Jennifer and Abby were still asleep when he left. He had tried calling home throughout the day, but no one answered, which seemed strange to him. It was strange but not alarming until he returned home. That's when the full gravity of the situation hit him. Police initially considered a possible home invasion. They considered the possibility of a home invasion gone wrong, perhaps a robbery that escalated into something more violent. But as the officers examined the crime scene further, troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. Despite the substantial blood found on the bed, there were no blood trails throughout the house. No smears, no footprints, nothing to suggest a struggle. Nothing was found in the hallway or garage. The house felt unnervingly sterile, almost too clean. Yet, inside Jennifer's parked minivan, investigators found small drops of blood inside. That seemed to be blood staining the scene. This discovery raised more questions than it provided answers. If a violent act had unfolded in the bedroom, and perhaps a body or two moved to the garage, why was there no trace of that journey anywhere? Forensic teams immediately began cataloging every piece of evidence, every speck of blood, every fingerprint, every trace, every fiber of clothing or hair was examined. Results would take time, but even in the early hours, detectives could feel the unease growing. There was a feeling that something didn't add up, that it was staged. As hours turned into days, the case only grew more perplexing. The initial sympathy toward Michael began to fade. The image of him as a devoted husband and father started to fracture. His role, deeply embedded in his church and community, was now questioned. The image of the perfect family began to crack. Under the weight of mounting suspicion, cracks began to show. Why was there such an absence of chaos in the scene? Why was only the bed covered in blood and nothing else? Why were the jewelry items left behind when they could have been taken? And what exactly had Michael been doing between 6 a.m. and the moment he returned home that evening? Within 48 hours of their disappearance, whispers began to spread among those close to the case. Detectives began to quietly reclassify the case. No longer just a possible abduction, but something far more calculated and sinister. Michael made an emotional appeal on local television. Standing next to his mother-in-law, he pleaded for the return of his wife and daughter. His church community rallied in support of him, offering prayers, support, and hope for the family. But behind closed doors, investigators had begun to doubt him. They began to view him not just as a grieving husband, but as a suspect. Not just as a grieving spouse, but as someone with a potential dark side. The investigation took a sharp turn. It was no longer just about finding Jennifer and Abby. It became about uncovering the hidden truths. The truths buried beneath a facade of normalcy, behind the illusion of a perfect life, and whether the man who built it all had been the one to destroy it. As the investigation dragged on with no clear leads, frustration mounted among the investigators. Search teams had combed through rivers, highways, and woodlands, looking for any trace. Detectives expanded their search efforts. They sifted through state and federal databases, searching for known kidnappers or violent criminals, looking for anyone with a history of similar crimes. Yet the trail remained chillingly cold. Another day passed with no new leads or progress, until finally, investigators called Michael Blagg in for further questioning. This was a second round of questioning, more intense than before. This time, they were determined to dig deeper into his story. Michael was asked to revisit every detail of that fateful day. They probed into his marriage, Jennifer's habits, and their relationship. They even asked about their daughter Abby's daily routines. Investigators were searching for any clues that might explain her disappearance. They wanted to know if there had been any tension between them recently. Any recent arguments, strange phone calls, or odd behavior? Any threats from outside their circle? Or conflicts with co-workers? Or people from their church? Or members of their church who might have caused trouble? Michael insisted that everything had been perfectly normal between them. He described Jennifer as a loving, devoted wife. Their home, he claimed, had always been peaceful and calm. He denied knowing of any enemies or threats to their family. He couldn't think of any incidents that might raise suspicion. But when pressed about the possibility of infidelity, his answer shifted subtly, leaving doubts. He stated he didn't believe there was another man involved. He was certain Jennifer had no other man in her life, but he admitted with hesitation that he couldn't be entirely sure. That uncertainty would soon weigh heavier than ever before. While searching through Jennifer's personal belongings, detectives found one of her religious devotionals. Inside, scribbled in the margins, they found a handwritten note, seemingly innocuous at first. At first glance, it seemed unimportant, but the date written on it was incredibly significant. The note had been written just one day before Jennifer and Abby disappeared without a trace. The message revealed something startling. Instead of attending church as planned, Jennifer had spent the morning praying with someone named Stanley, seeking guidance for something that had been troubling her deeply. Investigators launched a full inquiry into this mysterious Stanley. The mysterious Stanley became their new focus. Friends, relatives, even fellow church members were questioned about him. No one knew of a man by that name in connection to Jennifer. Then, a shocking revelation emerged. Stanley wasn't a local figure, as they had assumed. He was Charles Stanley, a nationally recognized pastor, known for his popular religious television programs. Jennifer had likely been referring to his televised sermons, watching one of his sermons just days before the disappearance. The sermon aired just 2 days before Jennifer and Abby vanished. In the broadcast, Charles Stanley had forcefully condemned adult content and its devastating impact on Christian families everywhere. Suddenly, everything started to fall into place. As the digital forensics team dug into the Blagg family's computer, they uncovered something unexpected. They uncovered a shocking discovery. There was no evidence of Michael having an affair after all, but they found hundreds of hidden adult images on the computer. Deep within the hard drive, far from view, the content suggested something darker than casual browsing. It painted a disturbing portrait of a man, struggling with hidden compulsions, kept secret for so long. Compulsions he had kept hidden from his wife for years. The images alone didn't provide hard evidence of guilt, but to the investigators, they suggested a deeper motive. They were a potential motive, something worth exploring, especially when considered alongside another crucial discovery. An unsent email, time-stamped 3:50 p.m., revealed more. Sent on the day Jennifer disappeared, just before the call. Just minutes before Michael made the 911 call. In the email, he apologized for ruining the day's events. He expressed regret for their inability to discuss things calmly. He lamented that their issues couldn't be resolved more peacefully. The tone of the email was tense, not loving. It contradicted the narrative Michael had originally shared. Michael had painted a very different picture to the police. Detectives were now more suspicious than ever. They revisited Michael's emergency call for more clues. A troubling detail immediately stood out to them. When Michael entered the house and found the blood, he never searched the rest of the home, not even Abby's room. It wasn't until the dispatcher specifically asked about Abby. Only then did he go upstairs to check on his daughter. He headed upstairs only after being prompted. The lack of any instinctive panic raised suspicions. The absence of a frantic search didn't sit well with the investigators. The team was growing increasingly suspicious of Michael's actions. Even more curious were the voicemail messages he had left. He had left a voicemail on the family's answering machine. One message in particular stood out. Left at around 3 p.m., it was filled with anxious urgency. He was already deeply concerned that no one was answering the phone. Yet instead of rushing back home, just 6 minutes away, he left a message and continued working as usual. The inconsistencies were stacking up, and the investigation was taking a turn. Lab results came back, confirming the blood analysis. The blood found on the bed, as well as in Jennifer's car. Only Jennifer's blood was found. Abby's DNA was nowhere to be found. All fingerprints recovered from the scene matched only the family members, no outsiders. Based on the amount of blood lost, the situation was becoming clearer. Experts concluded that Jennifer likely hadn't survived the attack. They believed she had not survived the violent attack. But without a body and no eyewitnesses, police still lacked the definitive evidence to make an arrest. They still had no proof to make an arrest. Michael remained under discreet surveillance, his every move watched. Officially, he was not yet charged with any crime, but behind the scenes, he had already become the prime suspect. 3 months passed, and then, unexpectedly, detectives caught a break, though not the one they had expected. But it was the break they had anticipated. One day, while reviewing surveillance footage, they caught Michael on camera at his workplace. He was loading office furniture, chairs, file cabinets, and small equipment into his vehicle, all being removed without permission, unauthorized. Investigators confronted the company about the theft. The company confirmed that Michael had no permission. He had no authorization to take any of the items. It was a small theft, but it spoke volumes to the detectives. It was a significant clue, a revealing sign, a man who could wear a facade of honesty, while secretly living a very different, hidden reality. Beneath the surface, deception thrived. This moment gave investigators pause, making them rethink everything. What kind of duplicity lurked in the mind of a man who publicly displayed his faith, yet hid dark secrets, yet quietly bent the rules for his own personal gain? Michael was brought in for questioning once again. The interrogation stretched on for hours. Detectives pressed, probing every angle they could, every inconsistency they found. But still, no bodies, no smoking gun, no clear evidence. But they hoped the mounting pressure would cause a crack in his story, in the carefully crafted narrative he'd built. 8 hours into the interrogation, exhausted and emotionally drained, Michael finally snapped. Michael asked a question that shocked everyone in the room. "What's the difference," he asked, "between first and second-degree murder?" The tone shifted. The mask slipped. Just for a moment, investigators leaned in, pressing him once more. "Where are Jennifer and Abby?" they asked again. But the opening quickly shut, and Michael regained his composure. Michael composed himself and offered no new information. Silence returned, thick and heavy in the room. But to at least one detective, something had changed. There was a moment during the questioning that stood out. Just one moment, when Michael's voice wavered, revealing something real. It was the only brief moment of truth he'd allowed to slip. But in the end, it changed nothing about the investigation. 10 hours of intense questioning ended with no confession. Michael walked out of the station, still free, yet the shadows surrounding him were growing ever darker. The next morning, things took another turn. Officers arrived at Michael's new apartment to follow up. They were there to follow up on the stolen office furniture. They knocked on the door, but no answer came. Silence grew and concern started to rise. They quickly called the building manager for help. When they finally entered the apartment, what they discovered sent a chill through the entire team. Michael was lying in the bathtub. His wrists were cut, and the water was stained red. But miraculously, he was still alive. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital immediately. It was quickly determined at the hospital that the wounds were superficial, not life-threatening, not a true suicide attempt. Investigators believed it was a calculated performance, a show, a tactic, a play for sympathy, and perhaps a distraction. 4 months had passed since Jennifer and Abby vanished without a trace, with no new evidence and still no bodies to find. The case stalled, and prosecutors had nothing concrete to act on. Every day that passed without discovery felt like a setback. It felt like another door was quietly closing on the investigation. Desperate for a breakthrough, authorities took drastic action. Authorities launched a massive search operation, hoping for answers. In April, over 200 volunteers combed through vast terrain. Covering thousands of square miles, they searched relentlessly. They scoured forests, ravines, fields, rivers. For 10 straight days, they pressed on. But despite their efforts, they found nothing. The mood grew grim as leads were exhausted and hopes dimmed. The frustration was palpable, but they refused to give up. Yet the team held on, refusing to let the case go cold. They held on to a quiet belief that the truth would emerge. Michael had slipped, made a mistake, and it would soon surface. It was only a matter of time before that mistake revealed itself, until that fateful mistake came to light. That time came, but not in the way anyone had imagined. Co-workers from Amatech Dixon remembered something strange. They recalled something odd from the day of Jennifer's disappearance, the day Jennifer and Abby vanished from their lives. Michael, a production manager at the company, had been seen repeatedly taking out the trash that morning. Not once, but multiple times, which struck them as odd. It seemed strange to them, and they remembered it clearly. Michael never took out the trash before, they recalled. This seemingly insignificant act suddenly carried enormous weight. Investigators began to form a theory based on this strange behavior. What if the bodies had been disposed of in the company's dumpster? What if Michael had placed them there that very day? What if he had disposed of them right under everyone's nose and carefully monitored the waste pickup schedule to ensure they were taken away? To ensure the bodies were transported straight to the landfill? The focus of the investigation quickly shifted. Attention was directed toward the Mesa County landfill, a vast site, a sprawling, toxic landscape filled with industrial waste and decay. Millions of pounds of garbage buried deep in layers, untouched. Spanning acres of land, the landfill seemed endless. The task ahead seemed monumental, almost impossible. But now, it was no longer about effort. It was about necessity, nothing less. The answers they believed were buried beneath the garbage, buried under piles of trash, waiting to be uncovered. And this time, they wouldn't walk away until they found them. They were determined to keep searching until the truth was found. They reached out to the landfill manager, hoping for cooperation. They presented a theory, one that seemed improbable but chilling. It was disturbing, but they believed Michael had used the dumpster. They believed Michael had used the company dumpster to dispose of Jennifer, to dispose of his wife's body, hidden in plain sight. The manager hesitated, clearly uneasy with the request. Digging through millions of pounds of waste seemed a monumental task. It was an extraordinary, almost impossible undertaking. But the investigators' resolve swayed the manager to help. With the help of modern waste mapping systems and detailed dump logs, they managed to narrow the search to a 200 by 300 foot section of landfill, 30 feet deep. A deep, overwhelming 30 feet of compacted trash. Still, the task ahead was overwhelming and daunting. With over 1.8 million square feet of compressed refuse, layers upon layers of decomposing garbage. On May 13th, the operation began with heavy machinery. Heavy equipment tore into the earth, lifting tons of refuse, lifting piles of refuse from the layered grave beneath. Volunteers and forensic teams carefully combed through every heap of trash, searching for anything that shouldn't have been there. The risks were high unstable terrain, toxic air, and more dangers. The air was toxic, and the deeper they went, the greater the danger. The more dangerous it became as they dug deeper. Days turned into weeks, with no sign of the bodies. The landfill revealed only rot, decay, and despair. Spirits began to wane as doubt slowly crept in. But on the 16th day, the unthinkable finally happened. From the churned debris, a human leg surfaced, twisted and barely intact. Lifeless, barely intact, but unmistakably human. The moment froze everyone on site, as if time stood still. One investigator later described the chaos that followed. He described the scene as chaotic and surreal, a blur of activity. It was surreal, a moment no one could have prepared for. Grown men and women running in every direction, overwhelmed by emotion, overcome with emotion, unable to fully process what had just occurred. No one had truly believed that this day, this moment, would come. And now, here it was, right in front of them. The decomposed remains of Jennifer were found, shocking everyone. They were swiftly transported to the forensic department for examination. The team confirmed what many had feared. This was Jennifer Blagg. It was Jennifer Blagg's body, her face still hauntingly familiar. She had been found still wearing her pajamas, as if she had never left her home. A dental brace remained fixed in her mouth, a chilling detail. An autopsy soon confirmed the cause of death. A gunshot to the head. A single gunshot wound to the head, fired while she likely slept. Fired while she was likely asleep, unaware of the impending danger. The next step in the investigation was inevitable. A warrant was issued. A warrant was swiftly issued for Michael Blagg's arrest. Michael Blagg was arrested at his mother's home without resistance. Back at the landfill, the search for Abby continued. Relentless. Investigators moved over 1,400 tons of garbage, inching closer to the truth. They descended 19 feet into the landfill's depths, digging through the layers of waste. But despite their tireless efforts, the little girl, Abby, was never found. After 52 agonizing days, the operation was reluctantly called off. The ache of failure would linger with the team for years to come. It would haunt the team, the feeling of not being able to bring closure. 2 years later, the trial finally began, bringing a sense of justice. The prosecution presented a chilling and calculated narrative of the crime. Michael Blagg had shot his wife in the face while she slept, an act of pure malice. He then wrapped her lifeless body in a nylon tarp, hiding it from view. He placed her body in the family minivan and drove to dispose of it. He dumped her into the company's dumpster, making it look like she was never there. He returned home and staged the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. He staged the scene to look like a failed robbery, a calculated move. The defense pushed back, insisting there was no direct evidence against him. They argued there was no concrete evidence linking Michael to the crime. No body, no witnesses, nothing linking him to the crime. No weapon, no confession. All circumstantial evidence at best. The defense insisted it was all circumstantial, without a single confession. But the weight of the facts told a different, more chilling story. 5 weeks later, the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder, the most serious charge. Guilty of theft against his employer, further tarnishing his character. Guilty of a calculated cover-up, hiding the truth at every turn. Michael Blagg was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. Without parole, ensuring he would never be free again. He was never charged in connection with Abby's disappearance. Abby's remains were never found, leaving another haunting mystery unsolved. Investigators believed control was the underlying motive for the killings. The dark secrets hidden on his computer revealed more than anyone expected. The meticulously staged crime scene, designed to deceive, became a crucial clue. His desperate attempt to maintain a spotless public image was unraveling quickly. All these details pointed to one man, whose carefully built facade was crumbling. A man who seemed willing to destroy his family rather than face the collapse of his life. He preferred to destroy his world rather than let his carefully managed life fall apart. He never confessed, never admitted to the unspeakable acts that shattered his life. Even after his conviction, his lips remained sealed. Unrepentant, Michael Blagg maintained his innocence, steadfast in his refusal to admit guilt. Years later, in 2014, a surprising turn of events would alter everything. His conviction was overturned, not because of new evidence, but due to a legal flaw. It was new evidence that led to his conviction being overturned. It was the discovery that one juror had failed to disclose critical information. The juror, a woman named Marilyn Charlesworth, had a hidden history. She had failed to disclose that she was a survivor of domestic violence. Her undisclosed history as a domestic violence survivor tainted the jury's impartiality. The defense argued that this omission had deeply affected the jury's fairness. The state decided to retry the case, despite the passage of time. This time, the trial took place in Jefferson County, with new eyes on the case. 17 years had passed since Jennifer's tragic murder, yet the truth still awaited. Witnesses were older, and memories began to fade with the passing years. But despite the years, the solid evidence still stood, unwavering. Michael was convicted again on all charges by the jury. His sentence of life in prison was reinstated, ensuring he would never walk free. Today, Michael Blagg serves his sentence at the Colorado Territorial Correctional Facility. He is incarcerated at the Colorado Territorial Correctional Facility, far from the life he once knew. His appeal was denied, cementing his fate behind bars. In 2018, a 3-judge panel upheld the original ruling, denying his appeal. The crime scene had clearly been staged, a deliberate effort to mislead investigators. The weapon used in the murder was traced directly back to Michael. The body was found wrapped in a tarp from his own workplace. The body was surrounded by trash from his office, an undeniable link to him. The story began with a trembling voice on a 911 call, filled with fear. It ended in a cold cell, miles away from Grand Junction, where justice finally caught up. Yet, a little girl's fate remains buried in silence, lost to time.